Hi, I'm Mike Robinette with DaytonOS.com. We're here to interview Joe Lacy, a member of the Dayton Public School Board and a very active political figure in the Dayton region. Joe, as I mentioned, has been on the school board since 2005. He served in the county auditor's office from 1995 to 2006 and is currently working in the county treasurer's office. He served previously in the Peace Corps in the 80s for a couple of years and is a CPA here in the Dayton area. He ran twice for state representative, once in 1998 against incumbent Bob Corbin, and then in 2000 against newcomer John White. After that, he ran for the Dayton Public School Board in 2001 for the first time and was unsuccessful. Was contemplating running in 2003, but did not get the Democratic Party endorsement and withdrew his campaign at that point. Then came back in 2005 and ran for the school board once again and was successful and has been serving since then. So Joe, we'd like to start out with this discussion about what brought you or got you involved in politics. What are your interests that caused you to begin your career in the political environment?
Well, I've been interested in politics ever since I was a little kid. In the 70s, in '72, I remember working on the McGovern campaign in Springfield, Ohio. But mostly, what brought me into politics, probably when I came to Dayton, it was the United States Peace Corps. Part of my job in the United States Peace Corps was actually working directly with a legislative assembly, and it was through that work I think I did decide that when I got home I wanted to be more involved in the governmental process of my own home when I get home. So
I noticed that you started your career seeking office as a state representative, and then after 2 tries switched and started running for the Dayton Public School Board. What caused that shift in focus in terms of your political activity?
I think I started out I started out running for state representative probably mostly because there was a void there and they needed someone to run for that seat for state representative. The second, that was the first run in '98. The second run may have been just very hopeful thinking on my part because it was an open seat. I thought I'd try again. But all the while, I knew that was a very difficult seat that I was trying. Sacrificial lamb was the term that was often used, and that any real political involvement that I was going to get involved in would probably start at a more local level.
So you've been on the Dayton Public School Board since 2005. What is it that you ultimately hope to achieve or accomplish as a member of the school board?
Well, ultimately, as a member of the school board, I want to bring a quality education to the kids of the Dayton public school system. It's a very difficult task because it is an urban district, and the performance so far has been bad for even urban districts. But I think with a certain type of focus, the Dayton City schools can improve, and that's basically what I'm working on, basically.
When you say with a certain kind of focus, the school system can improve, can you give some specifics of what you mean when you say that?
I think what I mean by focus is that you really need to focus on one thing. You really can't go out to a lot of different gimmicks. There is a reform system. There is a set of reforms that were put in place by Kids First, and some of those did go into the focus that I had in my mind. And this is the focus that I campaigned on in 2001 and in 2005. The focus is pretty much for an inner city school. Inner city schools have the most problem hiring and retaining quality teachers, and that basically is the main part of education, is getting a good teacher and keeping a good teacher in the classroom. And that should be the central focus, and everything should revolve around that. Now, part of the reform effort, I believe, has worked towards that. Actually, the reform effort of the Kids First reforms the main parts of those reforms, the big money parts, were trying to reduce class sizes from from kindergarten to second grade, and hiring a lot of math and literacy coaches. Those were some of the biggest. Those were the big money parts of the reform package of the Kids First. What that they eventually brought in. Unfortunately, those are big money parts, and they can't afford to retain them, or haven't been able to afford to retain them. I'm meandering now, my main focus really always has been really on supporting the teachers, keeping quality teachers, and hiring quality teachers.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, which is the defeat of the Dayton Public Schools levy obviously is creating financial issues. How do you see the school system best addressing those financial issues at this point?
The only way they can address those financial they have done a lot of cutting, but a lot of the cuts have actually increased class sizes and hurt the school district. And so really, eventually, they are going to need another levy. I'm not saying a 16 mil levy or whatever we have, or 15.7 mil levy, but they are going to need another levy to try to ease the pressure on bulging class sizes, large class sizes. We've got a lot of problems in our classrooms right now. I mean, I've heard complaints from teachers that they don't have people around to relieve them so they can go to bathroom breaks. We rely on a lot of staff to teach these kids. We need to have the staff to do it. And if we need to have another levy to bring some more people into Dayton Public Schools, that's what we need to do.
One of the leaders on the Dayton Public School Board, Gail Littlejohn, and one of the leaders of the Kids First movement has announced that she's going to be resigning her position because she's moving out of the Dayton region. How do you see that void in leadership being filled, and who do you anticipate might be a likely replacement for Gail Littlejohn's seat?
Gail Littlejohn, in the past year, pretty much has stepped aside. Although she is a leader, she has stepped aside to work more in her business and leave more of the leadership to the new president, Yvonne Isaacs. But I think the void, I think she really intended a lot of the void to go to the superintendent, or to be filled by the superintendent. She was, as the Dayton Daily News probably referred to, she was a very active, micromanaging, they accused her of, board member for the first few years of her on the board. But eventually she let that go to Superintendent Percy Mack, and I think Superintendent Percy Mack has taken more of the reins. The board has left more up to Percy Mack. As far as leadership on the board, I'm not sure who they're going to elect to replace Gail Littlejohn. Some of the candidates that we've looked at in the past, I'm not sure. I mean, I think Drew Fuller would make a very good candidate, but.
You mentioned more of the power shifting to the superintendent in recent times on the school board because of some shifts in terms of who's involved from the school board standpoint. Has that been a challenge to you as a new member of the board in terms of your ability to carry out what you think your role and responsibility is as a board member?
Well, I think there is a very basic, there's a basic political philosophy clash currently on the board as to how much should be left to the administration and how much the board should mull over. And yeah, this does cut right straight to that disagreement that we have. It's currently, most recently, it's been a 6-1 disagreement. One example of that is basically the budget. Currently, they go by a model of governance, the school board, and this was started by Kids First, a model of governance, where basically the board really doesn't vote on the budget or adopt a budget that the administration is held to. They appropriate funds, generally just saying you can do whatever you want and write your own budget. My position has always been that we need more, the board needs to be more involved in fiscal policy. This is just one example of how the board, I think, in the most recent years, has really left a lot of policy to the administration, the administrators of Dayton Public Schools, Percy Mack, and the treasurer, and so forth. I think a lot of what they're leaving to the administration are really policy decisions that the board members should be held accountable for, and that the board members need to take more part in.
Could you give us a couple examples? You talked about the budget process and fiscal policy. Could you give us a couple examples of the kind of fiscal issues that you think the board has ceded over to the superintendent and the administration that the board should be more involved in?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much the entire fiscal process. There really is no budget as far as the board is concerned. The budget is set by the administrators, and it is changed by the administrators. The board does. I mean, we get to look at it, and basically they say they approve it, but that approval really means nothing. If they want to go higher, if they want to spend more on a particular on salaries for a particular function, than they'd originally budgeted, it really doesn't matter. Basically, in other governments, the appropriation process is you set a budget, the governing body votes on the budget. If the administration has to go over that budget for whatever, for a particular type of salary, then they have to go back to the legislative body or the governing body and tell them, well, we have to spend more on this particular line item because and then give a reason why their original analysis or their original assessment of how much they would need to spend for that is short, or if something happened that would make them have to spend more on a particular item.
So does the current board, when there are changes that are needed to be made to the budget by the administration, do they simply rubber stamp those without discussion? Is that what you're...
No, the current board actually doesn't even know if there are changes to the budget. I mean, if there are changes to the budget, that issue really doesn't come before the board, really. That's really taken care of by the administration themselves, the department heads and the administration.
I see. Another issue that's sort of related to this board superintendent issue I'd like to ask you about is recently you filed a lawsuit against the board over the state open meeting law. I'd like to have you talk a little bit, if you could, about what precipitated that specifically, and how do you hope to address the issues related to that you're challenging the board on in terms of the open meeting requirements.
I did bring a lawsuit because, and it was specifically over the Roosevelt issue. From the day, actually even before I started on the school board, I had heard of decisions that they had made, and then I had wondered, well, I'd never even heard of that being discussed in a meeting or voted on in a meeting. One board member who I really can't say his name, talked about, would tell me about certain decisions that they'd make, and they may have been making them in executive committee or somewhere else, but they were not making them in a meeting. And I noticed this also when I came onto the board. I did see and hear from board members who I really thought had no understanding of the executive session and what the purpose of the executive session was. And I think there was an abuse of the executive session, and I think that came to a head in the case of Roosevelt when that they made the decision and decided to announce their decision before there really hadn't been any meeting. I discussed this with Gail Littlejohn, and she told me that this is the way we operate. And so I decided that really it was my only avenue, or it was my only avenue of appeal, was to go to common police court.
Now, you have encouraged and are supporting 3 people to run for open seats on the Dayton Public School Board this November: Sheila Taylor, Nerny and Shirley Crisp. And I'd like, if you could, to talk about why you've gone out and found people to run for the school board that you are openly and actively supporting, and what you hope that these people can help you accomplish as a member of the board.
Well, 2 of these, Sheila Taylor and Nancy Nerny, had been planning to run for quite some time. I did recruit Shirley Crisp, or I encouraged her to run. I'd been on a committee with her, the committee to try to save an older historic school building. What I think these 3 candidates would bring to the school board, mainly I think is some independence. Pretty much all the school board currently is either appointed by Kids First or appointed by a board that was dominated by the Kids First, or they're generally supportive of Kids First and the policies that Kids First have espoused. I think these 3 candidates bring some more independence, especially with a policy of really relying upon or over-relying upon the administration. I think these people would be able to bring their own experiences to the board, and that's why I've supported them.
And of course, the Montgomery County Democratic Party recently took up the issue of potential endorsements of school board candidates, and they did not endorse 2 of the candidates that you were supporting, I believe. And as a result of that, you resigned your position as treasurer of the Montgomery County Party. Could you explain to our listeners your reasoning behind that, and why you think you were unsuccessful in getting your slate of candidates endorsed by the party?
I wasn't completely unsuccessful. Sheila Taylor was endorsed by the Democratic Party. Nancy Nerny, I really just think they just didn't know her, basically. It's pretty tough to get an endorsement through if you really haven't spent a lot of time with some of the people that lead the Democratic Party downtown. And same with Shirley Crisp. She really didn't know the people down there. The rest of your question was why...
Why did you feel it was necessary to resign as treasurer of the Montgomery County Democratic Party as a result of the decision related to the endorsements of the school board candidates?
Well, I mean, as I'm part of the leadership team of Montgomery County Democratic Party as its treasurer, I just thought it was a conflict of interest, nothing more than that. I mean, I thought it was an issue that might have come up sometime eventually. It just came up at this time, where I support 3 people, 3 Democrats that where the Montgomery County Democratic Party has a candidate running against one of those, or they have an endorsed candidate, Stacey Thompson, running against Shirley Crisp.
I'd like to switch gears again, if I could, and talk a little bit about the issue of charter schools. It was recently reported that the Dayton public school system, or the Dayton area, has the 2nd highest number of charter schools in the country. What do you see as the challenge to the Dayton public school system in terms of the growing development of charter schools, and what impact do you think they're having on the overall education of children in the Dayton region?
Well, to me, I'll answer the last part first. The overall impact is it's an experiment that I think is hurting inner city districts which is basically their experimental ground. I think it's messing with them and hurting them the most by creating a lot of schools that really don't have the oversight that they need. So you are going to have Colin Powell's. I remember Gail Littlejohn used to say that charter schools are no problem. The good ones will stay and the bad ones will go away. And the problem is the bad ones just don't go away. This one happens to be going away after a lot of pressure. But not all the bad ones do go away. And people will send their children to bad charter schools for various reasons. If they've had a bad, they like the name Colin Powell. They might think a school is might teach their kids some values for some reason. They've had a problem with a particular teacher at Dayton Public. I think it has hurt the public school system. I don't know what else to say.
It's very much tied, it appears, to the whole challenge of how do you fund public education in the state of Ohio, which has been an issue, of course, of legal challenge over a long number of years and is still unresolved. I think most people would agree. And I know that when you first started running for political office, at least as a state representative, that was an issue that you campaigned on even 10 years ago. What do you see as the ultimate solution to the school funding issue for both Dayton and the state as a whole?
Well, as a school board member, I really have been focused on that so much that really creating a financial system to finance the Ohio public school system, that really is a different question that I really haven't focused on. But all I really can say is that, yeah, the system right now, and I'm sure a lot of people say that the system right now relies too heavily on the real estate taxes and the levy system, and they're moving away from intangible taxes. They have yet to fill that void. Right now they're filling the void, but to set a permanent void to fill to make up for intangible taxes. But all in all, yeah, the levy after levy after levy problem tells me that the system relies too heavily on real estate taxes.
Since the school funding issue is really decided on by the state legislature and the governor, are you planning to be actively involved in or participate in campaigns for members of the Ohio House, the Ohio Senate that are coming up next year in 2008?
I'll be supportive. I'm not sure to what degree I will be participating in any particular campaigns. A good friend of mine, Mary Wiseman, will be running for judge, I know, at the time too. So I haven't really decided to what degree I'll be involved with campaigns or whose campaigns I'll be working on. There's always plenty of campaigns to work on, you know that.
One of the underlying issues that impacts on education in the larger inner city school systems is both racial and economic segregation, and the fact that generally you have areas where you have high concentrations of poor people, and obviously that creates challenges to an education system that you don't necessarily have in areas where you don't have that kinds of concentration of poverty. Ultimately, what do you think could be done to try and address that underlying issue that each inner city school district in Ohio anyway faces?
That's a tough question, because really we are, as a city, I mean, basically we are segregated just by our boundaries, or by our school board boundaries, into a school system that does segregate a lot of very underprivileged people. Currently, the Dayton City Schools have set up, since Kids First have come on, they brought in at least 2 new elementary schools, the all-girls school and the all-boys school. Those schools, as they've been marketed and so forth, have managed to bring into the all-boys and all-girls school a concentration of children that have higher levels of support from their parents. So really, that's one problem. I mean, that's actually, I don't think that the school system should exacerbate the problem by actually concentrating their more well-supported children into separate schools. In the end, I do think that a neighborhood system of schools would probably be best. We are heading towards that. I mean, the current school board would tell you that they're heading towards that, but of course, the only new schools that they've created since kids first came have not been neighborhood schools.
In reviewing the media coverage of Joe Lacy, the school board member, and Joe Lacy, the candidate, you can't help but notice that it appears that at least the editorial view of the local newspaper, the Dayton Daily News, has become more negative towards your role as a board member and the issues that you've tried to focus on and the questions that you've tried to raise. Why do you think that has occurred in terms of at least the editorial view of the Dayton Daily News?
Well, I think that the Dayton Daily News, I think they've had maybe some level of buy-in with the Kids First crowd. At some level, I mean, they really did support them and encourage them with their editorials when Kids First decided, when Gail decided to recruit people and run, when Gail Littlejohn decided to recruit people and run. When you have that level of buy-in that the Dayton Daily News has had, I think I do understand that maybe they are very disappointed when I actually went in and knocked off one of the Kids First people in 2005 when I beat Donnie Scatliff. So if nothing else, I think basically that's all there is to it, really. I mean, it's really tough, as I know. I mean, I've tried to recruit people to run for school board, to have someone answer the call or have someone be recruited to run for school board and then lose an election. That can be, I can see how that could possibly be infuriating for people who are encouraging these people to run and to see them lose. So that's all I think it is, really. They've accused me of meddling or troublemaking, but they really don't have any specifics about what trouble I've caused on the board, and the few specifics that Ellen Belcher from the Dayton Daily News has pointed to. I've pointed out that she's basically wrong, or she's reported those things incorrectly.
Now I know you're into just wrapping up the second year of your term, and your term is up 2 years from now, of course, but it's not too early from a planning standpoint to start thinking about your future political endeavors. And do you anticipate seeking re-election in 2009 at this point?
Yeah, I do. I anticipate running again in 2009. But I mean, in the future, I mean, and this is part of why Ellen Belcher has accused me of being political. In the future, I do not rule out a possible run. As you mentioned, I have run for state legislature in the past, but and I don't see myself running anywhere in the really near future running for state representative. But after 2012, after 2010, in 2012, we will have a whole new set of districts, of legislative districts, and we'll see what happens then.
I know one of the issues that you've been concerned about in your role as a school board member is the demolishing of historic school buildings in the city. Could you talk about that a little bit in terms of what specifically you see as the issues and what you'd ultimately like to see as the resolution to those?
Yeah, and I think this is just another classic example of the board relying very heavily on the administration. The administration, from day one of the building program, has pushed to basically demolish every school building in the city of Dayton and replace them with new school buildings. Now, I can understand that basically a lot of teachers, a lot of administrators might not have any connection, might be from out of town, might not have any connection to these old buildings, may want the amenities or whatever the classroom sizes and some other things that new school buildings can offer, or brand new school buildings can offer. But I'm pretty sure once we see Stivers, our only renovation project to date, we'll see that actually renovated school buildings can be just as good and can offer just the same amenities to our kids and our teachers as the old ones. I think that the administration has fought against renovation despite what the neighborhoods have wanted and other people in the community, including of course the alumni, have wanted, and has not, when having meetings to discuss the design or the wishes for a neighborhood school or a school in a neighborhood, really has not included these people. And I think this is an important part. And I think that the new school, the Taylor, Nerny, and Crisp, would be more open to considering renovation of our historic school buildings, buildings like as Roosevelt, Julian, Wilbur Wright, so that's another reason that I'm supporting these three.
Now, the Kids First group that has basically managed to control a majority of the board for the last several years has received substantial funding from the business community in the Dayton area, and has raised and spent in excess of $100,000 in a campaign for school board members. And the typical campaign for a school board seat in Dayton is a fraction of that in terms of cost. How do you see that playing into all the issues that the school system and the school board is facing, and the ability to try and recruit and attract other people to run for office for the school board when they see themselves confronted with such a well-financed organization that's supporting a specific slate of candidates?
Well, that's starting to fall by the wayside, I believe. I mean, the biggest money raiser right now, of course, was Lee Massoud, who raised $17,000. Still quite a bit for a school board race. Prior to Kids First, the most that had been spent for a school board race was probably around $10,000, and that would have been Tony Hill. But yeah, Lee Massoud raising $17,000 so far. I think that the big numbers that we saw were really Gail Littlejohn and what Gail Littlejohn had been able to raise. You said that it wasn't over $100,000. It was over $200,000 in 2001, and in 2005 they spent over $50,000. But yeah, as far as the money's concerned, that does, I'm sure, when you look at the campaign finance reports, that does raise a lot of issues. But I think that we'll be coming down to more reasonable numbers in future campaigns.
I see that Friends of Joe Lacy has produced a piece of information about the three candidates you're supporting: Sheila Taylor, Nancy Nerny, and Shirley Crisp. What, besides producing campaign materials of this nature, are you hoping to do to support their campaign between now and Election Day?
Well, I really never told any of these candidates when I was supporting them that I was going to be bankrolling them or anything like that. Basically, that's about it. I spent about $230 on this, and another $250 on postage, and that's about all that I've spent so far. But actually, 230, that got me 6,000 of these, and I'm just taking them door to door.
Well, this is Mike Robinette. We're going to wrap up our interview here at DaytonOS.com with Joe Lacy, member of the Dayton Public School Board and supporter of candidates Sheila Taylor, Nancy Nerny, and Shirley Crisp in this upcoming school board election.